The thing about this job is that most of it is just flat. You spend your life watching a strip of gray asphalt unroll in front of you, a hypnotic, mind-numbing ribbon that goes from one nowhere to another somewhere. My run was a classic, a load of machine parts from Wichita, Kansas, to a distribution center just outside of Rapid City, South Dakota. It's a route I've done a dozen times, a 2-day grind if you push it, and I was pushing it. I'd spent the first leg cutting through the belly of Kansas, where the land is so flat you feel like you can see the curve of the earth. The CB radio was mostly static and the occasional, half-asleep voice of another driver complaining about scales or weather. I had my coffee, my bag of beef jerky, and the endless, monotonous hum of my rig's engine. That's the soundtrack of our lives, a constant diesel drone that becomes a part of your own heartbeat after a while. I stopped for a lukewarm dinner at a truck stop outside of Salina, the kind of place where the gravy has the consistency of paste and the coffee could strip paint. I didn't linger. The goal was to make it to a rest stop just over the Nebraska border before midnight, catch a few hours of shut-eye, and then hit the road again before dawn. The night was clear and cold, a sharp contrast to the dusty heat of the day. I remember thinking how the stars were brighter out here, away from the city glow. It was one of the few perks of the job, these little pockets of untouched beauty. But beauty out on the open road has a flip side, a deep, profound loneliness that can settle in your bones if you let it. I didn't let it. I've been doing this for 18 years. You build up a callus against the solitude. My mind was already on the next day's leg. I-90 through South Dakota, past the Badlands, and then the big tourist trap itself, Mount Rushmore. I'd see it in the late afternoon sun, a quick glance as I swung north. It was just a landmark to me, a sign that I was almost done with this particular haul. I'd never given it much more thought than that. The rig purred along, my headlights carving a tunnel through the immense darkness. I was in that zen state, not quite thinking, just being a part of the machine, a part of the road. The white dashes in the center line were like a metronome, lulling me into a calm rhythm. It was just another night. It was supposed to be just another night, but somewhere deep in my gut, a little knot of unease was starting to form. It wasn't anything I could name, not a sound or a sight. It was more like a primal, animal sense that the night was watching back. I shook it off, blaming the third cup of bad coffee. You get jumpy on your own in the dark for too long. It's normal. At least, that's what I told myself. I finally pulled into the Nebraska rest area around 11:30 p.m. It was mostly empty, just a couple of other rigs parked with their engines quiet and their cabs dark. I found a spot at the far end, killed the engine, and let the sudden, ringing silence wash over me. The only sound was the faint tink-tink-tink of the engine block cooling down. I reclined my seat, pulled my cap over my eyes, and within minutes, I was out. I woke up with a start a few hours later, my neck stiff and the cab chilled. The digital clock on the dash glowed 3:17 a.m. I hadn't meant to sleep that long, but the body takes what it needs. I fired up the engine to get the heater going, the roar unnaturally loud in the pre-dawn stillness. The other trucks were gone. I was alone in the vast, empty lot. As I rolled back onto the interstate, I flicked on the CB, hoping for a little company in the form of some other insomniac driver's voice. What I got was mostly silence, broken by bursts of static that sounded like frantic, whispered conversations just on the edge of comprehension. I fiddled with the squelch, but it didn't help. Then, a voice, clear and tight with tension, cut through the noise. Anybody else see that, eastbound, mile marker 110? The trees. Christ, the trees were moving. Another voice, crackly and faint. Just keep your eyes on the road, buddy. Don't look at the woods. You know you don't look at the woods. Then the first voice again, higher pitched now. It wasn't in the woods. It was on the rocks, bigger than a man, just shadows, but wrong. A third voice, old and gravelly, interrupted. Knock it off. You're gonna spook the new blood. Just drive. Sun'll be up in a few hours. The channel dissolved back into a hiss of static. I chuckled. A dry, humorless sound. Trucker ghost stories. You hear them all the time. Tales of phantom hitchhikers, ghost cars, and things that stalk the roadsides. It's a way to pass the time, to add a little spice to the monotony. I'd never put any stock in them, but the fear in that first driver's voice. It felt real. It prickled the hairs on my arms. I pushed the thought away and focused on the dawn. A faint, gray light was beginning to bleed into the eastern horizon, turning the endless fields of Nebraska from black to a dull, shadowy gray. By the time I crossed into South Dakota, the sun was properly up, a pale, cold disk in a vast, empty sky. The weirdness of the night felt a million miles away. I stopped for fuel and a proper breakfast in Bordeaux, the morning sun warm on my back. The world felt solid and real again. The waitress was cheerful, the coffee was fresh, and the other patrons were just normal folks starting their day. The whispered fears on the CB seemed like a dream from another lifetime. But as I got back in my truck and merged onto I-90 West, a single, unbidden thought crossed my mind. Don't look at the woods. It was ridiculous. I was a grown man, a professional. I wasn't scared of the dark or of shadows. Still, as I drove past the thick stands of ponderosa pine that began to crowd the highway, I found myself keeping my eyes firmly fixed on the road ahead. The day wore on. The Badlands rose up to my south, a jagged, broken landscape that looked like God had taken a knife to the earth. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way. My schedule was tight, but I was making good time. As I started the climb into the Black Hills, the air grew cooler and the pine forests thicker. It was later than I'd planned when I finally saw the signs for Mount Rushmore. The sun was dipping low, casting long, deep shadows through the trees. I knew the viewing area would be closed, but you can get a decent, fleeting glimpse of the monument from the highway if you know where to look. I wasn't planning on stopping, just a drive-by to say I'd seen it. I came around a bend, and there it was, framed by the dark green of the pines. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Teddy Roosevelt, Abraham Lincoln. Their stony faces were lit by the dying, orange light of the sunset. I'd seen 100 pictures, but it was still impressive in person, a monumental feat of engineering and artistry. I gave it a glance, then returned my eyes to the road. But something nagged at the corner of my vision, a wrongness. I looked back, a quick, double take. Jefferson. His face was turned slightly more towards the road than it should have been. And his mouth. It wasn't its usual firm, resolute line. It was parted, just a little, as if in the beginning of the gasp. I shook my head, hard. You're tired, I told myself. Your eyes are playing tricks from staring at the road too long. The light was tricky at this hour, all shadows and angles. I focused back on the highway, my hands tightening on the wheel. It was nothing. Of course it was nothing. A few miles later, the road curved again, offering another, more direct viewpoint. I couldn't help myself. I looked, and my blood ran cold. They were all looking now, all four of them. Their great stone heads were turned, their blank eyes pointed directly down at the road, at my truck. Washington's brow was furrowed, not in thoughtful wisdom, but in deep, troubled concern. Lincoln's face, usually so sad and noble, was contorted with a silent, desperate grief. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. This wasn't fatigue. This wasn't a trick of the light. The expressions on those colossal faces had changed. They were watching, and they were afraid. Panic is a luxury you can't afford behind the wheel of an 80,000-pound vehicle. I swallowed the metallic taste of fear in my mouth and forced myself to breathe. Just get off the mountain, I thought. Get to the lower elevations, get to the depot, just drive. I pushed the accelerator, the engine groaning as we picked up speed on the downhill slopes. The forest on either side of the road was now a solid wall of impenetrable blackness. My high beams seemed feeble, pathetic little cones of light that only made the darkness beyond seem deeper. That's when I saw the first movement, not on the mountain, but down here, in the trees alongside me. A flicker of something massive and dark, keeping pace with the truck. It was just a shape, a deeper black against the black pine trunks, but it was big, too big. It moved with a loping, a natural grace, flowing through the trees without a sound. My heart hammered against my ribs. I fumbled for the CB, my hands slick with sweat. I keyed the mic, breaker 19, anybody copy. Eastbound on 16, coming down from Rushmore. I've got something in the woods. Silence. Then, that same old, gravelly voice from the night before came on, calm but deadly serious. Son, you listening? You don't look at the woods. You don't stop. You run your lights and you keep that hammer down. You understand me? They don't like the light, but they're fast. Don't you stop. The channel went dead. No static, just dead air. I was alone. The thing in the woods was still there, a silent, racing shadow. I could feel it now, a pressure, a malevolence that radiated from the forest. It was hunting. I glanced in my side mirror, and my breath caught in my throat. Back up on the mountain, silhouetted against the twilight sky, the faces of Rushmore were no longer looking down at me. They were turned away, looking back into the depths of the black hills, their features now etched with a pure, stone-shattering terror. They were watching something else. Something worse was coming from behind them. The road straightened out for a brief stretch, and I saw the lights of a small town twinkling in the valley below. Safety, civilization, it felt 1,000 miles away. The forest was thinning, but the thing, my shadow, was still with me. It was gaining. I heard it then, a sound that defied explanation. It wasn't a growl or a roar. It was a low, resonant thrumming, like a massive stone slab grinding against another, a sound that vibrated through the very frame of my truck and set my teeth on edge. It was the sound of the mountain itself being alive. A road sign flashed by, Keystone to 2 miles, almost there, just a little farther. I pushed the rig harder, the speedometer needle climbing into a dangerous territory for a fully loaded truck on a winding road. I was gambling with my life, but the alternative was unthinkable. That's when I saw the second one. It burst from the tree line 100 yards ahead, crossing the road into bounding, impossible strides. It was a creature of living shadow and jagged rock, a nightmare shape that stood on 2 legs but was nothing like a man. It had no discernible face, only a swirling, chaotic darkness where a head should be, but I felt its attention lock onto me, a cold, predatory focus. I slammed my hand on the air horn, a long, blaring scream of defiance and panic. The thing recoiled, the sound seeming to cause it physical pain. It melted back into the shadows on the other side of the road, but I knew it wasn't gone. It was just regrouping. I was in the Gauntlet now. They were on both sides of me, these shifting, stone and shadow forms, keeping pace, hurting me. I could see their movements in my peripheral vision, a terrifying ballet of darkness. The presidents had seen this. This is what they watched from their granite perch. This is what haunted the slopes of their mountain. They weren't the monsters. They were the sentinels, and they were terrified. I blew through the sleeping town of Keystone doing 60, the roar of my engine echoing off the closed-up gift shops and cafes. I didn't slow down. I didn't dare. I checked my mirrors, expecting to see those things loping down the main street behind me, but there was nothing. The streets were empty and quiet. Had I lost them? Had the town lights driven them back? A fragile, desperate hope began to bloom in my chest. Maybe I was in the clear. My destination was a private industrial depot about 10 miles north of Rapid City. It was my beacon, my sanctuary. I focused on it, repeating the address in my head like a mantra. Just get to the gate, get unloaded, and get the hell out of South Dakota. The road here was darker, more isolated. Wide open fields replaced the dense forest. I started to relax, my death grip on the wheel easing just a fraction. The fear began to recede, replaced by a shaky, post-adrenaline exhaustion. It was over. It had to be over. I saw a pair of headlights approaching from a side road up ahead. Another vehicle, a normal person. The sight was so comforting I almost wanted to cry. As it drew closer, it slowed, as if to turn onto the highway in front of me. I eased off the accelerator to let it pass. It was an old, beat-up pickup truck. It pulled out onto the road and then just stopped, sideways, blocking both lanes. I stood on the air brakes, my tires screaming in protest, the trailer threatening to jackknife. I came to a shuddering halt just feet from its driver's side door. Anger flared up, hot and bright, burning away the fear. What the hell was this idiot doing? I leaned on my horn, a long, furious blast. The driver's door of the pickup opened slowly. No one got out. The interior light didn't come on. The cab was pitch black. And from that darkness, a shape began to pour itself out onto the road. It was formless, a spill of absolute blackness that drank the light from my high beams. It didn't stand up, it unfolded, rising until it loomed over the cab of my truck. It had no eyes, but I felt it see me. It had taken a new form. It had learned to use our traps against us. The thing in the woods hadn't been chasing me. It had been hurting me, right to this. I don't know what instinct took over. Maybe it was the old trucker's voice in my head. You run your lights. I didn't throw it in reverse. I didn't try to turn around. I slammed the gear shift into the lowest granny gear I had, stood on the throttle, and aimed for the thing. My front bumper smashed into the pickup truck, shoving it aside with a shriek of tearing metal. I felt the impact, a solid, jarring thud, but I didn't stop. I kept going, my engine roaring in protest, pushing the wreckage of the pickup along the asphalt. I looked in my rearview mirror. The blackness was gone from the cab, it was just gone, but it wasn't over. I felt a presence, a crushing weight of ancient, cold stone, settle onto the roof of my cab. The whole truck listed to one side with the impossible weight. The metal above my head groaned and dented inward. I couldn't breathe. The air was thick and cold, smelling of deep earth and forgotten places. I was sobbing, screaming, praying, all while keeping the wheels straight, my foot welded to the accelerator. The lights of the depot were in sight now, a fenced-in compound of blessed, beautiful fluorescent lights. As I crossed under the glare of the security lamp at the gate, the weight on my roof vanished. Just vanished. The truck bounced back to level. I didn't stop. I crashed through the cheap wooden gate arm and didn't kill the engine until I was backed up against the loading bay, surrounded by the harsh, artificial light of the warehouse. I sat there for an hour, maybe more, just shaking. The security guard came out, angry, then concerned, then terrified. When he saw my face, he saw the crushed roof of my cab. He saw the shredded front end and the smears of black rock and something that looked like old, dried lichen on the bumper. I never finished that run. I left the rig there. I told the company it was a breakdown, a family emergency, anything. I took a bus home and didn't get behind the wheel for 6 months. I drive again now. It's all I know how to do. But I never, ever take the South Dakota run. And when I'm on a dark road at night, I don't look at the woods. I keep my eyes on the road and my lights on bright. And sometimes, when I'm in a certain kind of darkness, I feel a phantom chill, and I remember the weight on my roof. I didn't just escape that night. I passed a test, I survived a culling, and I know, with a certainty that freezes my soul, that the things on the slopes are still there. They're always watching, and they remember the ones who get away.